was as surprising a decision as it was unprecedented. Facebook users in Australia can no longer find articles and posts from local and international news outlets, and they can't share them either.
I think Facebook banning news is terrible, actually. I do use Facebook. It seems to be a catch-all, and I can get all of my news in the one spot, so it will really impact me.
Facebook removed the content in response to a proposed law that would force tech platforms to pay news publishers for the information they produce. Australia's government has slammed the move. It says the restrictions are harmful and go beyond news content.
Facebook was wrong. Facebook's actions were unnecessary. They were heavy-handed and they will damage its reputation here in Australia. Their decision to block Australians' access to government sites, be they about support through the pandemic, mental health, emergency services, the Bureau of Meteorology, were completely unrelated to the media code, which is yet to pass through the Senate.
The bill was proposed by Australian lawmakers in July. Since then, Facebook and Google have threatened to withdraw their services from the country. The government argues that tech giants should pay newsrooms for their journalism, especially as the news industry struggles with the loss of ad revenues to online platforms. But the social media giant says the proposed law fundamentally misunderstands the relationship between their platform and publishers. In a statement, it said news media don't lose money because of Facebook. They make money because of it. Publishers willingly choose to post news on Facebook as it allows them to sell more subscriptions, grow their audiences, and increase advertising revenue. But the ban has affected emergency services too, with pages that warn the public of COVID-19 outbreaks, cyclones, and bushfires becoming inaccessible. Digital rights groups have called the move reckless and abrupt.
Mark Zuckerberg himself has said that it's not the role of a private company to be censoring the news that people can receive. And so I find it, deeply hypocritical for Facebook to then be responding in this way and blocking Australians' access to the free flow of information.
The law has wide support from politicians. If passed, it could set a global precedent and may change the power dynamic between global tech companies and governments worldwide. Rahul Radhakrishnan, TRT World.
Well, for more on this, let's go to Angela Daly. She's a senior lecturer in law and technology at the University of Strathclyde in Scotland, and she joins us now from Glasgow. Welcome to the program, Angela. Now, while Google has taken quite a different approach ahead of this proposed Australian law, they've struck deals with several media outlets in order to pay for their content. Facebook has chosen quite a dramatic approach in contrast to what Google has done. What do you make of this move by Facebook to block Australian news content from its platform?
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pretty crazy move, quite frankly, from Facebook to block large amounts of content from different providers in Australia, not just news sites. And I think it's also very problematic, like some of the other commentators have said, to impede the free access to information on behalf of Australians in particular. Now, I do think that perhaps some of this was unintended, that some websites may have got caught up in this in a way which wasn't intended by Facebook, but it demonstrates the power that platforms like Facebook have, but also the problems that governments like in Australia have in trying to regulate tech giants. Australia isn't the biggest country in the world, and it's not also the biggest market for companies like Facebook. Some of them may decide that it's better to withdraw from that market rather than comply with rules such as these. And I think what we're seeing with Facebook is an example of that.
Both Google and Facebook have fought this proposed law because they say it doesn't reflect how the internet works and it unfairly penalises their platforms. They say they're simply displaying excerpts and links to the actual news outlets themselves. They're not ripping off any of their content or plagiarising these articles. Do they make a valid point here?
I think in that sense, yes, that they're not typically infringing copyright, for instance. They're giving news publishers new audiences as well. However, I think the real issue is around funding and revenue streams. So really, we see laws such as this proposed in Australia. We've got something similar in the European Union with the Directive on Copyright in the Digital Single Market and the press publishers' right in that as well, sparking something similar. And I think at the root of this is really a battle between news sites, news providers who have generally been losing money or not earning as much money as they would want to with the dawn of the internet, and sites like Google and Facebook, which are earning a lot of money and gathering a lot of revenues through advertising. So at the heart of it, I think there is this tension between the two. And in places like Australia, we can see that the losers are actually consumers and users whose access to information is being impeded.
So earlier on in this debate over the proposed law, Google had threatened to pull its search function out of Australia, and Google, as we know, has become synonymous with the internet these days. Now, this together with what Facebook has done, does it only add to this perception that perhaps big tech companies are in fact abusing their market dominance?
What I'll say is I think it certainly shows us how powerful big tech companies are, and that they are private companies rather than public services, technically speaking, even if they are providing what in many cases is a public service around accessing information and facilitating communications. I think another big problem is when we see attempts by governments of smaller countries or smaller markets like Australia to try and regulate these tech giants. There seems to be more compliance with various laws in the European Union, for instance, around internet regulation, such as the Copyright and the Digital Single Market Directive that I just mentioned. I would say because the EU is a very large and very attractive market. For some other markets or countries like Australia, in my view, the government is going to have more trouble. And also the UK, now that it's outside of the EU, it might be more difficult for them to effectively regulate big tech because of the size of the market, because it's smaller, because it's less attractive for these companies. And I think this is something that governments need to be aware of and perhaps need to work together on how to tackle big tech.
And we'll see what Facebook chooses to do in the coming days in relation to its Australian business. Angela Daly, thank you so much again for joining us on the